Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
The Skipjack. There used to be hundreds plowing the waters of Chesapeake Bay. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Some say there were originally 600 skipjacks built along the bay since the early 1890s. Others suggest 1,000. Some claim up to 2,000. Those are the words of local columnist Brice Stump in his new book, Working Skipjacks of Deal Island. They are a unique vessel with their ability to plumb the waters of the bay and its tributaries, and they're best known for scooping up the oyster. Well, we have Brice in our studio this morning. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Don.
So what inspired you to do this book?
I've been taking pictures of skipjacks since 1979, and I was hoping to put out a book of skipjack photos that covered that time period from 79 to the present, and I needed some contemporary photographs as of last year. So I went back to Deal Island, started to take some pictures, and realized that this was an opportunity to do a book specifically on skipjacks today, and I found out that there is no other definitive skipjack book on the market. There may be 5. You'd be hard-pressed to find 5 skipjack books. I was quite surprised with that, so I decided to do a book on the Deal Island skipjacks. It was convenient for me to get to. I had the time and I had the talent to do this project, and I thought that historically it needed to be done.
How important do you think it is to preserve this this heritage? Particularly, if you've done it obviously through a book, but there used to be, as you indicated a moment ago, maybe 600, 1,000, so on. Now there's what, maybe a dozen, maybe 2 dozen?
Yeah, the number fluctuates, Don.
Yeah.
People seem to think that there's still 100 skipjacks out there, but there's not. There's probably 12 that is still working the bay, dredging oysters. And the number, it's hard to pin down a number because it fluctuates. Some of the vessels are taken out of service, some are rebuilt, some are restored. So consequently, there's always a little bit of a fluctuation in the numbers, but probably 12 working skipjacks today. I believe 6 to 8 are in Deal Island. It's probably the home port to the largest remaining fleet that has come down from 600, 1,000, 2,000
right
down to a dozen or so. Deal Island is sort of unique in that it has always maintained its skipjack fleet locally. A lot of the boats, some of the boats that come down to Deal Island now are from Tillman and from Cambridge. They come down to work the oyster grounds. And consequently, they may overwinter in Deal Island and go back to their home ports in spring. But the Deal Island skipjacks have traditionally worked out of Deal Island, particularly in recent years. So as oyster grounds are closed, as oyster grounds are opened, as some are depleted, as some are rebounding, that determines where the oyster skipjack fleet calls home. So in this particular case, because of Tangier Sound being a good working oyster ground, that's where the boats are.
So no, there are not really a whole lot of working skipjacks left. I mean, why is it we have this? I mean, obviously there's some changes in the laws and power boats and that kind of thing. Why we've seen this diminishment, do you think? I mean, what happened? Because as you said, there certainly. In fact, I was talking to Stoney Whitelock a number of years back, and he said as a kid he could remember looking out of the harbor, and there were like hundreds. I mean, just all these masts out there. Now it's kind of disappeared.
Well, I guess it's not unlike some aspects of agriculture when practices change. Mm-hmm. We used to plow fields. Now we don't plow fields. We used to do a lot of disking. We don't do disking. There used to be a lot more tomato fields. It's a matter of the labor force. These boats, Don, are very expensive to maintain and to build. $500,000 to build a new skipjack. $375 was spent restoring the Catherine, which is featured on the cover of the book. With that kind of a financial outlay, you have to have the return on the oysters to support the boats. And that is not happening today for a lot of reasons. The state is increasingly setting aside oyster grounds that are not available to the skipjacks and to watermen in general. And because it costs so much to maintain the skipjacks, they have got to have the oysters. And that's not the case. I think last year they were getting 50, 60 bushels. Before that, they were getting perhaps 100, 120, 130. I believe they're allowed 150 a day. And skipjacks are unique. They are allowed to go 2 days a week with sail power, 2 days a week with the yaw boat or push boat power. They are not allowed to have sole propulsion system on board the boat. Because the traditional way of dredging was with sail power, they have 2 days sail, 2 days power. Unfortunately, over the years, the number of men on the crew who are familiar with working with sail power has diminished considerably. And the sad news is there isn't a crew on the island that can work dredging under sail power alone.
Is that population, by the way, aging in terms of the people who, A, do this sort of thing, they use a skipjack, and B, I mean, is it the younger generation, do you get a sense, is moving out of this and finding other avenues of work? Because obviously it's fairly tough, a tough industry in terms of it's tough work. I mean, it's not as lucrative perhaps as it was before. I mean, do we see that population aging in terms of people who can actually do this kind of work, you think?
Well, Don, that's a good question. The kind of work it is demands young people, not older people. Is the pool there? It's decreasing. Do people want to do this kind of work? Well, obviously no. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, but if they can go out 2 days a week with sail power, 2 days a week with push power, and they only opt to go out with the push power, then they are not motivated to go out with sail power. This means that if they're making, if they're taking in 100, 150 bushels a day, and they're getting $50 per bushel, they can double their paycheck by going out with 2 days of sail, but they don't do it. It's tricky. It's old school. It's slower than the push boat. They've got to turn around. They've got to depend on the tide and the wind to work in their favor. Yes, it's tricky. And the young crowd, the young crew does not really want to do that. As far as the pool of workers, the crew, they're okay. It's just getting the right person that wants to do this kind of work. The men are out there, Don. It's just whether or not they want to work on a skipjack. It's cold. And it might surprise your listeners to know that skipjack crewmen do not have workman's compensation. They do not have health insurance. They do not have vacation. They do not have sick days off. They are subcontractors. And they are paid in cash each day that they work. So that's the appeal to the men, that they can get paid when the day is done. But as far as is it the crew that's the crew pool that's limiting the skipjacks? No, I don't think that's really a factor. I think if they were catching a lot of oysters and they were able to go out the full 4 days, that it would be a stronger industry. But because the boats are so expensive and the makeup of the crew is what it is, this can't go on. This can't go on forever.
Do you think it'll disappear?
Oh yes, I think a lot of the skipjack captains are in the impression too that this cannot last forever.
Do you think that we will lose something culturally when that does? I mean, are we losing it now, do you think? Because one of the things that, by the way, that's always struck me about particularly the watermen, I come from the West, I come from Los Angeles and so on. They remind me of the cowboy who had his horse, and he roamed the ranges. He had jobs. He was independent. And it seems to me that watermen are maybe similar in the sense that they're very independent. They have their boat, they got their crew, and they really work as individuals. But do you think we will lose that culture as this disappears?
Well, I think you're absolutely right about the individuality or the individualism
Yeah.
of what this is. The men can decide to go out or not.
Right.
I was down to the island a couple of days ago, and I found that some of the crew were short. I found that some of the guys I saw on one boat one day were on another boat the next day because they're filling in the gaps and trying to go out when one boat does and when one boat doesn't. The crews shift back and forth. The individualism, and you asked me why this is important to the Eastern Shore. I believe that this is the last working piece of living history that is unchanged probably for a century. These men on these boats basically do the same thing they did in 1890. And I don't know any other industry or job on the Eastern Shore that does this. We used to have canning houses, a way of life that was around for almost a century. Strawberry field picking, a certain culture and class there. But this cannot go on forever. And I think it's important to have photographed it. What is special about this book is it gives the person like you, the come here.
Right, I got it.
That come here the opportunity to see a skipjack other than just once a year under sail at the annual skipjack race. People, I guess, Don, have told me that they've been around skipjacks a lot of their life and did not realize or see the perspectives in this book of skipjack life. Even though they were familiar with the skipjacks, this brought a brand new, eye-opening perspective about what these guys and what these boats do for a living. Dredging is very hard on these wooden boats. It is dangerous. I think a guy just this week had a dredge fall on his foot, put him out of commission. And when he's out of commission, he's out of commission.
Not making money.
He's not making money, and I don't know who absorbs the medical cost on this, how he's going to manage on his own, the family here at Christmas, kind of depending on him. So, yes, it certainly is a water cowboy way of life to a degree that they're certainly individual guys. There's no doubt about that. And I think that what appeals to me is that these guys are who they are. They're hardworking men. They've got challenges, life challenges, just like the rest of us do, just in different ways. So I believe that this book documents and preserves a way of life that has really been overlooked. That there is no other definitive book on skipjacks was surprising, because the boat is the official Maryland boat since 1985. And I thought there was a lot of competition out there. It wasn't even my intention, Don, to initially go in this, let's publish a book. It was to get a portfolio of pictures and decide what to do with that portfolio. But I think it's important. In this book, every single individual is named and identified. So often in these publications, magazines, newspapers, books, promotionals, advertisements, they overlook the guys who make all this possible. And they're important to this. They are the ones who make this happen. And I wanted every guy to be recognized for the achievements or the contributions they make to going out and having a good day on the bay.
I want to turn to couple of the boats. One, my favorite is, of course, the Catherine. I've actually been on a number of times. Stony Whitelock was the one who owns it and has fixed it up. I guess it was actually built in 1901. Tell me a little bit about this particular boat.
The Catherine's a beautiful boat. And then, as I told you just prior to starting this interview, just because I did the interview,
Right.
just because I did the book of photographs, 650 photographs in this book, I'm still learning as I go, Don. There's all facets to this skipjack project. building it, maintaining it, working on it, photographing it. Each little thing here has its specialty. I am not that familiar with the technical aspects of the boat, this construction, what makes them, each one of them so different and unique. But the Catherine is the featured skipjack in this book, not because of any, there's no reason, I guess what I'm saying, that I made the Catherine the prominent featured skipjack in the book, only other than I went out on the Catherine and I did a day in the life of a skipjack. And the Catherine is from daybreak to returning, calling it a day at the end of the workday and in the harbor. That is representative of the life on the skipjacks, of all the skipjacks working the bay. Same procedure on all the boats. So I didn't want to devote telling the same story 8 times. There's only so many ways you can take pictures of people culling oysters on their knees. And there are certain aspects of photography that were individual to each boat. But the Catherine is a representative boat. The other boats, or the other skipjacks in the book, certainly show photographic scenes, but not as detailed as the Catherine, because it is what it is.
One of the things, by the way, that struck me about the photographs, and actually reading now a novel about a waterman and his daughter, actually on the Western Shore. But one of the things that struck me about the photographs, and I don't think you realize it if you just simply go out, is the visual images of them pulling these big, gigantic nets up. I mean, sometimes I guess they have certainly what they call winders, I guess, to pull them up by motor. But nonetheless, I mean, sometimes they break down. But it's a remarkable thing about how they're able to reach down. What was that like when you saw them do that?
Well, back to what I just said about a number of people who have worked around skipjacks but were unfamiliar with what really goes on a skipjack, including some of the people who work at the harbor. They did not know what these guys do out on these boats, other than they just show up with oysters on deck. So, Don, the winders that you mentioned are 100 years old. They are recycled from old skipjack to old skipjack. They are motor-driven, motor-powered dredge winders. They have a certain simplicity and nostalgic appeal and a familiarity that really is endearing, even if you're not familiar with the workings of a skipjack. There's something simple and just neat about these winders because they are so darn simple. They either pull the cable in or they let the cable out.
Right.
That's basically what they do. But that they've been around for 100 years shows that simple works. Now, on the back of the book, you talked about the size of the dredges. On the back of the book is a picture of 3 18-year-old guys pulling in a dredge by hand on the city of Crisfield last winter, the winter of 2016. The motor, excuse me, the gears in the winder broke. They had no ability to pull up the dredge. The dredge can weigh about 500 to 700 pounds. Wow. It was 75 feet below the boat. The steel cable is about the size of your little finger. So there is a way to pull up the dredge using the halyards on the skipjack, the lines that are used in the sails. For some reason, Captain Stan Daniels didn't opt to use that recourse. I don't know whether the lines were entangled or they weren't safe for this. I don't know. But the 3 boys pulled up the dredge by hand. It was a very exhausting project because they had 75 feet of cable coming on board with nowhere to put it. It's also interesting to know that even though these boats look really nice and big when you're looking at them sailing the bay and you're up close, there is only 5 feet of working space between the winder and the side of the boat. The boat's only 15 feet wide. winders take up about 5 feet, so at least the guys 5 feet on each side. So the guys were standing where the dredge should be, pulling up the dredge itself, and then they had to go around to the other side of the boat and pull that one up so they could get back to port. Ed Farley from Easton, Talbot County, is photographed in the book. He's not a working, he's not a working skipjack captain from Deal Island. He is from Tillman or the Talbot area, and he is the man that all the captains go to when they need parts or to replace their winders. Ed kind of keeps an eye out for these recycled winders. You don't go to Lowe's or Home Depot and buy a winder for a skipjack.
You get an old one.
Yes, sir. You get an old. Now the Mini V, which is Stoney's newest boat,
right,
has a hydraulic system on it, which photographically is quite a departure from these old winders. I'd much rather be on the boat that had the traditional winder system on it. I think the crews like it better because they're so simple to use. Go ahead.
So when you were out there sailing, what was that like for you? And I don't mean in the sense of just the individual, goings on, but is there a connectiveness, do you think, to being out there on the water like that? When you get that emotional feel of, what it's to be out there?
I think that's a good point. When you're out on a working skipjack, it's just you, the boat, and the crew. Your problems are on the shore. You're out there back to nature, so to speak. There are no distractions. You're doing what you're doing. You can observe the sky, the clouds, the water, the waves, the smell of the setting, feel the coldness. The winder engine makes a considerable amount of noise, as does the push boat, and it sort of becomes almost melodic to a degree. The guys certainly are used to it. Yes, there is a certain appeal. And to your earlier question about the cultural importance of the preservation of this, very few people will ever have the opportunity to go out on the bay on a working skipjack and experience the same kind of a lifestyle that was experienced in 1890. It's neat. I think in the book I quoted one of the guys saying that if they hadn't gone out today, they would have been home fighting or arguing with their girlfriend, and out here it's just all the guys and working the bay.
By the way, we should note by the passing of Art Daniels. He was a skipjack captain for a long time. What kind of loss do you think for the bay? Somebody who was so prominent and spent so much time. I know his sons, I guess, are now out, and I think you certainly worked with him when you were taking these photographs.
For clarification, his last name is Daniel.
Right. Okay.
And this is in the book. I had to point this out a number of times. His children and his grandchildren spell it with an S. He spells it without an S.
Ah, okay.
So, and I lapse back and forth just like everyone else does. He was unique, Don, in that he was one of the few watermen who had a really good rapport with the press. Even from the 60s, he was approachable, he was knowledgeable, he was gregarious, he was accommodating. He was just the ideal person to go to when you had a skipjack-related question or you wanted to do a skipjack-related project. He was extremely knowledgeable because he went so far back. I believe he was 94, 95 when he died. He went so far back that he grew up knowing the people who had been on some of the earliest skipjacks. So they brought a lot to him. They told him skipjack stories of the crews, of the captains of the boats, where they were built. What goes into the making of a good captain and a good boat and a good crew. So, yes, he knew all the little nuances that just made for great listening, great reporting, and a very knowledgeable source of the skipjacks that were. A lot has changed in the way the skipjacks are handled today. They use a lot of the lumber that's been treated. treated lumber.
Treated lumber,
yeah. Treated lumber for restoration in the skipjacks. And back in his day, people were still looking for the ideal tree for the mast and this kind of stuff, yeah. And the wood, the secondary woods on the skipjack. So, yes, I personally miss him because if I wanted to know about what was life like during the Depression for a waterman's family on Deal Island, he could tell me. And I am so grateful that I had the opportunity and the foresight to ask him as many questions as I could, knowing that his time on Earth, like all of this, is limited. And I did not want to go back and say, gee, I wish I'd asked them this. I wish I had asked them that. So I asked him every conceivable question about every aspect of life about the watermen and skipjacks that I could have done. And I'm really glad I did. On the back is his son, Stan, taken in March of 2016, and now Stan is almost on his deathbed with dementia and health problems. So Daddy Art's gone. I think we've lost 7 people in this book in a year. So I'm glad I did this at the right time. This project, even from its inception, was meant to be. I know that sounds mystical, but it was. I soon came to realize that so many things were going right in my favor that it was beyond coincidence. I was sort of got goosebumps reflecting on this. Everything went right in this book, and I don't believe I've ever been involved in a project in my 36-year career with the Daily Times. We go out on weekly assignments.
Sure.
Things go wrong, even with you.
Right.
But this was different. This was month after month after month of work, and everything went right.
And you, by the way, we also should mention that all of the photographs are in black and white, or they look a little sepia toned, actually, at least from some of the lighting. Why did you decide to choose that particular medium?
Okay, talking about things going right, this picture that you see on the back cover of the guys pulling in the dredge by hand has never been photographed before. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time with the right captain.
Right.
And you cannot take skipjack pictures like this on the boat. That was even more important. Had I been on the boat, I would have seen any of this. So I'm glad I was on another boat, but it was an opportunity that has never afforded itself to another photographer. Go back to your question again.
Right, about these, and then these are in black and white.
Okay. These pictures are in black and white for a very specific reason. For much of the heyday of the skipjack, they were always photographed, particularly in newspapers, in black and white. Some of the books that are out there today have black and white photographs in them. But I wanted the photograph to tell the story. I did not want things to compete with your eye. I did not want the yellow antifreeze jug or the Pepsi-Cola can or the red life preserver or the white tub to take your eye away from the action. And in the beginning of the book, I have a little story from photographer, restorationist Mike Day here in Salisbury, who had a preservation image business for a number of years, doing work for the Smithsonian and other key museums across the nation. And there is a special art form to black and white. And I'm really delighted that people, when they pick up this book, they know what they've got in their hands, and they'll say, oh, I'm so glad it's in black and white. I love black and white. And black and white just tells it differently, the story and the mood. Your eye goes right to what's going on. It isn't distracted or watered down by color. So that's why black and white. It was a task of, surprisingly, to get black and white right. This is full color.
Yep.
Let's try it again. This is full 4-color printing. The process is just identical to color printing. It's just as expensive, and here it is.
Sounds like this was a labor of love.
Yes, it was a labor of love, but I sort of obligated myself to taking and setting up a deadline to get this book out.
Always good.
Yes, well, yes, that encouraged you to meet a certain deadline. But it's like anything else. The production end of it isn't quite the same as the artistic, the fun part of
Right.
putting a book together. There was challenges in getting it done. There are typos in the book. I admit that. It isn't for a want of trying. We had problems getting the book printed in black and white, and those spelling errors got back in the book. But as one man told me, Brice Stump readers aren't concerned about a few typos, which is very kind. So it isn't about there's 60,000 words and captions. There's a few stories. The book is about the pictures and life out on the Chesapeake Bay with a skipjack.
Well, I have to admit, they're absolutely gorgeous. I mean, the way they're all laid out, and the printing is. I might say that to listeners, the printing of the book and these photographs are extremely good. It's sometimes you'll find photographic books that aren't. This really does the trick. Well, we appreciate you stopping by. We've been talking with Brice Stump with his new book, Working Skipjacks of Deal Island, and we encourage people to contact him. Or where can they get the book?
I'm glad you asked that, Don.
Now that I think about it, because
I want the listeners to know that this is a self-published book,
right.
Not unlike a lot of books that are out on the market, and that's because the people out in the Midwest, is that where you're from?
The West. I mean, California guys.
California guys may not be interested in skipjacks.
Well, they should be.
A major publishing house goes by the demographics.
Okay. So where can they get?
So, self-published. It is available through my website, My Shore History, all one word, myshorehistory.com. It's available at Barb's Hallmark in the Twilly Shopping Center in Salisbury, Lucky's store on Chance down there near Deal Island, Scotts Cove Marina. And now the News Center in Salisbury, the News Center in Easton, and the Dorchester County Historical Society in Cambridge. And Don, I tried to make this book available locally to benefit the Skipjack Heritage Foundation Museum, to benefit the Teakle Mansion in Princess Anne, because the books that are sold at Somerset Choice Antiques in Princess Anne, they are solely responsible for the operating budget of the mansion, and this book sale at their shop helps them achieve that goal. And I want the money to stay local. I do not want this to be in big bookstores. It is not going to be in Amazon. It is not going to be in Barnes & Noble. It's going to be available to the local business communities or organizations that can benefit from the sale of this book.
Well, we appreciate you stopping by. This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Rank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on Pack 14.